Inspiring and informative time together. My name is Halldór Úlfarsson, and I'm going to talk about my humbly named project here. I'm going to try to tell you what this is, a little bit about where it came from, and possibly where it might be heading. The thing in question is an electroacoustic string instrument, which so closely resembles the cello, but has extra features. And this explains it completely. There's nothing more. I come from fine art, and I drifted off into industrial design or product design based on my interest in this project or instrument making and inventing, let's say. Yeah. Right. Okay. Maybe I'll try to tell you a little bit about what the Halldorophones does. This diagram maybe adds a little bit to the previous one. You have 8 strings. It doesn't make any sense, but it tells you anyway. It has 8 strings. Each string comes out as a line level signal. You mix them together, you put them back in, so you get feedback. So there's nothing new here. But it tries to package that thing very succinctly. And it tries to communicate with the player intuitively. And you can see how string players recognize these elements quite well. At least the first 2. We can debate the third one. And this brings us maybe to my intention, or what I became interested in, which is maybe roughly speaking music and the culture of music as material for myself as a visual artist. I saw that there is so much enthusiasm, dedication, history, practice to tap into. And this was maybe a product of what I was being taught or what was implicit in my studies when I did fine art, that there's a scarcity of material. There's a kind of maybe cynicism in fine art these days, and visual artists, at least the ones I know, really struggle to find material. Yeah. Anyway, I will try to give you an example that tells you what this instrument is without me talking. So this small example is meant to give you a sense of the kind of timbre and this infinite sustain that's afforded by this dedicated feedback string instrument. It started out when I was studying in Helsinki at the same time as Cora here. I was interested in being a part of this experimental music scene that's was very live and vibrant at the time. And I created my own feedback kind of guitar to play with, but at the same time that was the only thing I was doing as an art student that made anybody interested out of all my projects. And you know, that for me was a pretty clear indicator of how to proceed. And then when this turned into a design project where I considered the users and, you know, ergonomics, and you get into the tradition of the thing you're speaking into, I also decided it's good to remove myself as a player. This seems to me to have been a good way to proceed. I've been working with this pretty dedicatedly for about a decade. The Halldorophones already has a kind of repertoire of works, which were recently showcased at the Tectonics Festival in Reykjavik, or some of them. And so there are always things happening that bring new light to what this material is. And for me, it was quite exceptional to have works re-performed. Because like we touched on today, so many of these things, they come and they're generated by the interest of the moment, and then they fade off into obscurity. Part of what I was originally interested in was to sneak my way into music, which is maybe now changing a little bit, that music has in some way accepted this project. And that was a kind of waymarker. This happened last month, and every time I get a chance to participate in, let's say, the ritual of the musical culture of, classical music, new music, it brings something up. And in that case, it was wonderful to have a second set of performers interpret the music that's been composed, rehearsed for the first time and performed as the composer intended, and then it's taken and re-evaluated. Anyway, this has also passed through the hands of various pop musicians, different projects that maybe are closer to visual art, but also in this kind of sound art scene, and like the piece of music that we just heard by Halldór Úlfarsson, who is a kind of performer-composer, could have been one possible end stop for this project. She is a cellist, she writes and performs her own music, and it suits her way of working very well. I thought that, okay, maybe it's too early for this to have that conclusion, and I kind of took my interest into this tradition of music that's composed and performed, and I pushed this instrument in that direction. Like most of the decisions I've made regarding this instrument, it's an intuitive thing. The academic music, the experimental academic new music scene, I think is where people who have the kind of rigid training of classical music are open to experimentation, and that I have this feeling that it might seep out from there into general use. And that's very much my intention. But like I said, this started out, at a distance. Visual artist looking for material. I find this project, I put my time, effort and interest in there. But now, for the first time, I start to feel this, that maybe I've pushed it far enough that sometimes the gaze turns back at me and people approach me and they're interested and they invite me into the practice of music. And then it feels like to me that the onus is on myself to react to that. And I'm not quite sure how to proceed. And in fact, I have a kind of selfish intent for the workshop tomorrow to get you guys to maybe help me a little bit to contextualize, decide what the questions are and how they might be answered. Just briefly on notation, there was, I have this toehold in the Academy of Fine Arts where I work in Iceland, where I am a guest lecturer at the music department, and I was able to arrange a seminar on the notation convention for Halldorophones, which was another one of these wonderful turning points where I had 4 composers sitting at the table telling me how it is to notate for and work with the instrument, and also a performer who had performed one of these pieces. There were some conclusions, nothing extra is needed really. The tradition of new music has enough flex in it in conventional notation that it works well enough. But again, that atmosphere of something that you've made being discussed as a reality in the world, matter of factly, it's not being questioned, it's being discussed as a given, which is wonderful, and again puts your head in a kind of spin cycle of, okay, what does that mean and where do you take it to? But I felt really like showing you an example of a trending phenomena in the new music scene in Reykjavik, which is graphical notation. And here is an example of a piece of music for Halldorophones, notated for like that. should say graphical animated notation. Okay, I'm 2 minutes over time, but I'll add this last image, which is a work of our students in this experimental course that we are calling this second iteration of temporized material at the music department at the Academy in Iceland. And this, to me, when I see these projects, once they've happened, I start to see a kind of method coming out, and it's looking at these classical instruments and seeing how they can be perhaps interfered with or hacked, so that they still make sense based on their original premise, but pushed a little bit, so that people understand that they've become or are becoming something new. And the students love it. It puts them, it activates them very well. And it's based on this, I think, a little bit like maybe Hans touched on earlier, that to create something that's so avant-garde that it has no connection or no footing is to create nonsense, but culture moves forward by keeping that conversation dynamic, where you pair the possibilities of the moment you're living in with what's come before. And so this has become something that, like, now that I kind of look at it from the outside, I see, oh, maybe this is a way for me to understand my own process with the Halldorophones and possibly contextualize it, discuss it, and inform how to move forward with it. That's it.